So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session. Today we're going to talk about the Ndrangheta, that is the Calabrian Mafia in East Germany. And if you've not been following what this mafia has been doing in the past, let's say, at least few decades, it might sound weird to you to think about why are we even talking about such a niche topic? Why are we talking about a mafia which comes from Italy? And why are we talking about its presence, not just in Germany, but in a very specific place in East Germany? And over the following, I think, half an hour, 45 minutes, you will actually start understanding why. Why is East Germany such an important place for us to understand the international expansion of one of the very localized mafia, which come from the very south of Italy, in a very little place, in a very little region, and how this mafia has been over the past 15, 20, 30 years expanding around Europe. But not only, we will see how the network actually goes as far as Australia, as far as Latin America, and we will see how all of that comes together in Germany. My name is Zora Hauser. I am a researcher at the University of Oxford, and I will be moderating this panel. And I'm very happy to have the two, I would say, most knowledgeable journalists today in Germany that have been studying organized crime, but specifically Italian mafias in the country that they live and about which they report every day. So we're having Margherita Bettoni. Margherita is an investigative journalist. She's also a book author. She's authored several books. She's been researching the Italian mafia in Germany and in Italy, obviously, as well, for almost a decade. And she has received multiple awards for her work. So welcome, Margherita. It's good to have you here. And we're going to have also David Klaubert with us today. He's a political editor and investigative reporter for FAZ. That's one of the major newspaper in Germany. And he is specialized in organized crime in Italian mafias in Germany, but not just in Germany. And we will see, for example, his work in Portugal that has been relevant, will be relevant for what we're discussing. And I guess also your expertise in Brazil. I will ask you about that as well. David speaks Portuguese and Italian. Margherita speaks German and Italian and several other languages, but those are the ones that are relevant for us today. They have worked together on a very interesting project, on a documentary about the Calabrian Mafia and especially its expansion into East Germany. So I'm going to hand over to Margherita now to introduce us a little bit into this world of the documentary while I'm trying to share my screen because we will watch a few minutes of the documentary just now. Please, Margherita.
Thank you, Zora. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our panel today. We are now going to show you the first couple of minutes of our documentary, Mafia Colonies Germany, German Unity's Blind Spot. Our investigative documentary traces how and when alleged member of the Calabrian Mafia moved to Eastern Germany right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We worked on this investigation for almost, let's say, 2.5 years. And during our investigation, we uncovered a still widely unknown anti-mafia case against the Ndrangheta that took place in East Germany at the beginning of the 2000s. This case and the wiretap conversation that investigators collected back then allowed us to take a closer look at how alleged members of the Calabrian Mafia operated in the East German states of Thuringia and Saxony after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This documentary was aired by the German public broadcaster ARD in 2021. And it's a product of a cooperation with the daily newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which David is representing here today. And just one last thing before we let you watch the first takes from our documentary. You see two of us here today, but our team is also made by Axel Hemmerling and Ludwig Kendzia, our colleagues that couldn't be here today. I just wanted to mention them too, because without them, this documentary wouldn't even exist. So enjoy watching.
Over 50 shots rang out across Duisburg one night in August 2007. The Ndrangheta were demonstrating to the Germans that they could kill people here too. The world's most powerful mafia organization had long since established itself in Germany, almost undetected. While Germans were still celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall and German reunification, and slowly reorganizing their police force, the Mafia were setting their sights on the former Eastern Bloc.
We are investors. We are like an institution. We create structures. We stick to our territory. If we don't get results, then we try somewhere else. Somewhere, we'll get what we're after.
Ecco perché non si registra, a mio modo di vedere.
In some areas, you can see that no Ndrangheta initiatives arise without a plan.
Di 'Ndrangheta sulla base di quello che può essere
The Ndrangheta doesn't act without a plan.
un approccio casuale. Non hanno un approccio casuale.
In order to understand the phenomenon of the Ndrangheta and its expansion drive, we traveled to Calabria, the birthplace of the worldwide criminal cartel. The southern tip of Italy is the home of the Ndrangheta. Just a stone's throw away, across the Messina Strait, is where the Sicilian Mafia, the Cosa Nostra, rules. In its shadow, the Ndrangheta has grown to be one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. We, a team from the MDR TV station and the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper, have analyzed numerous files which were previously secret or thought lost. We have met with Italian and German investigators dedicated to fighting organized crime. Most of our talks were confidential. This is the first time that such a deep insight into the colonization of the East has been possible. We are especially interested in clans from San Luca who have chosen Thuringia as a base. We find structures the Ndrangheta uses to secure their power and launder drug money. San Luca is an inconspicuous mountain village in the Aspromonte Massif. Few tourists make it this far. The Ndrangheta does not flaunt its wealth. Italian investigators say that over 40 families here are involved with the Ndrangheta, but can only prove it in court in a few cases. However, San Luca plays a major role in the criminal structure of the organization.
So it's always interesting to see the documentary again. I've seen it before, and looking at it, the first question that really comes to my mind is, we've seen San Luca, we've seen this little village in Calabria where we know that the historic heart of this criminal organization that has existed for more than 150 years is, but you did a documentary about Thuringia. So it says in the documentary, we chose Thuringia. We decided to make the documentary about East Germany. Thuringia is a region, for those of you that don't know Germany that well, is a region in East Germany. So Margherita, maybe you can tell us a little bit, how did this idea come about? Why did you decide to do a documentary about East Germany, about Thuringia, and not just do a documentary about San Luca, for example?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's put it that way. Why we chose East Germany at the beginning and not the West? First of all, like a lot of Italians came to West Germany as working migrants back in the 50s, which is 80 years ago, which makes it hard to investigate who came and with what purpose back then. In East Germany, we are talking about a migration that took place 30 years ago, because of course the Italians had to wait for the Berlin Wall to fall to get there. So it's like a more recent phenomenon, which makes it easier to investigate, even if easy, it's not really the proper word to put it, but easier. Secondly, you have to imagine how a city like Erfurt looked like at the beginning of the 90s, so after the fall of the Berlin Wall. East Germany was back then was in a state of decadence. Take Erfurt, for example, the capital city of Thuringia. Its beautiful city center was like really in a state of decay, which means that everyone wanted to invest in the city center, was very much welcome. And that's exactly what the Italians did. They came, the Calabrians we are talking about, they came to East Germany in the mid-90s and they started opening restaurants there. And you can imagine that's how the former mayor of Erfurt put it, talking to us, like they were happy about everyone wanting to invest, because like the Italians were opening this restaurant, which meant tax money, for example, and which meant having like a flourishing city center, and who wouldn't want to have it for its own town, for his own town. And that's on the same hand one reason also, because the people who should have done it at the very beginning didn't had a closer look at where this money were coming from. So we had this very interesting situation, and we really was willing to take a closer look at all of that, because it was kind of interesting. And also, of course, because we knew that there was a very, let's say, well-based Ndrangheta presence in the state of Thuringia. We knew it also from from former investigations.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it is quite interesting because you mentioned restaurants, right? So if you just look at the restaurants, you would not notice anything different from these restaurants and completely normal restaurants, pizzerias, and Italian ice cream shops, for example. But if you look behind, if you look at the story that is behind it, you would sometimes find waiters that have a very low salary and within months just invest a lot of money into these restaurants. Or you would find in Erfurt situations in which a restaurant would be abandoned maybe for some time because it doesn't make any business reason to really invest in it. But then these families have arrived, or these people have arrived and started to systematically invest, right? This is what you found in...
Absolutely.
But then the question is, if on paper, if on the surface, it looks like so normal, how do you go about finding the information? How do you research what's the structure behind, which is so well hidden? So maybe David, you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. There have been, like, we didn't start from zero. There have been some stories about the mafia being there in Erfurt. It was like after we saw it at the beginning of our film was the so-called massacre of Duisburg, where 6 people. Afterwards, we knew it was members of the Ndrangheta who had been shot by other members of the Ndrangheta because of a bloody feud going on in the city, in San Luca, in this little village. And this was the first time that investigators in Germany actually looked deep into the structures or tried to find out. And this was also when they found connections to Erfurt. They found the day after the massacre, the Italian police, they listened to a call going to a restaurant in Erfurt. There have been family connections to Erfurt. And so this was the first time that it became public. That investigators had even before been looking into the restaurants and networks in Erfurt. And there were also journalistic publications. There were stories of the Ndrangheta going to Eastern Germany after the fall of the wall. And there were what in the end, in my opinion, turned out more as a myth. There is this infamous call of one Ndrangheta boss telling another, okay, directly after the fall of the wall, go to Eastern Germany and invest as much as you can and buy everything. So this is a quote you find in a lot of journalistic, but also other papers that talk about the Ndrangheta in Eastern Germany. But then we decided, okay, this looks quite interesting. We want to look deeper into it. And this story, as you said before, we found this structures there, but it wasn't like the stories where the myth is that they went there with bags full of money and bought entire streets of houses. So
yes, I think this is a really important point because I've been researching the presence of the Calabrian Ndrangheta in Germany as well for quite some time. And at the beginning, really what I found in terms of information was very alarmist, was very superficial, either just ignoring the whole phenomenon for a very long time, and then just from one day to the other saying that the mafia is everywhere, that it has basically control in Germany, and the reality is somewhere in between, right? These structures, they do exist, they are in Germany, they are relevant, but they're not pervasive, they're not everywhere really. So maybe here, I'd like to go back to Margherita. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what do we know about Ndrangheta in Germany. When we say that this organization is in Germany, are these cells or what do we find? Are these people that operate independently? Are they organized in a structure? What do we know about the presence of the Ndrangheta in Germany generally?
Yeah, well, first of all, we know that the Ndrangheta has an historical presence here in Germany, which is not as long as getting as back in time as it is in other places like Australia, for example. But here in Germany, we have this present probably since we don't know exactly the starting moment yet, unfortunately, but we can imagine it has been sometime in the 60s, between the 60s and the 70s. And we know that there is a strong presence here in Germany in several states, like in the south, for example, in Baden-Württemberg, in Bavaria, in North Rhine-Westphalia, in Western Germany, in Rhineland-Pfalz, also in the state of Thuringia, of course, in the east, in Saxony, as I was mentioning, in Hessen. So you see in several regions throughout Germany. And you have to think about this structure, like you were asking about the structure. And yes, the Ndrangheta is very, very well structured in Italy as well as in Germany. And here in Germany, the Ndrangheta is organized, I would say, almost in the same way it is in Italy. So you have like this basis unity, the Ndrina, which is like let's say like a group. In some cases, like in the case of Thuringia, we are looking into of blood members, or family blood members.
Clan, almost.
Exactly, almost a clan, exactly, put it like that. And this is something we uncovered actually during our documentary. It was unknown to the public before, and also it was unknown to us before we uncovered it, even if we heard about theories about this. It's that the Ndrangheta in Germany built up something which is called Crimine di Germania, which is like, let's say, let's put it like that, it's a structure which is there to prevent episodes like the Duisburg massacre to happen again. So it's there to look for peace amongst the different clans, for example. And there is a similar structure in Italy as well, which is called the Crimine di Polsi. Polsi is a place close to San Luca, which is the hometown to the core group of people we were looking into during our investigation. And there is like an exchange between these two crimini. And what we also know, for example, when we are talking about Thuringia, about Ndrangheta clans actually coming from San Luca, as I was saying. And you have to imagine they are really not strictly, let's say, because they operate also on themselves here. It's not that they have to report about everything they do to Italy, but there is still a strong connection between them and the motherhood, let's say, in San Luca, in the city of San Luca.
So the way we have to imagine this is that there is an organization in Italy, in Calabria, which is structured around these clans, and these clans are independent to a certain extent, but then they're also coordinating to a certain extent. And I find it fascinating that what we see in Germany is that the same structure, basic structure, is replicated exactly. So you have clans, they cooperate, they sometimes don't cooperate, they sometimes are in competition, and Duisburg has shown that when things go wrong, it can get bloody in Germany as much as it is the case in Calabria. But that was a mistake, really, right, David? We haven't seen violence in Germany connected to the Ndrangheta specifically, but more generally to Italian mafias. What would you say?
Yeah, sure. Like the Italian mafia, or especially the Calabrian mafia, they understood that when there is blood, when there are dead people lying on the ground, like we had after the Duisburg massacre, then the investigators take them serious, and then they start to investigate, and in the end they interrupt the business. So I think that what makes the Ndrangheta maybe even more dangerous than other crime groups, because they understood, okay, we have to be quiet, and then we can do our business, and then we can entrench deeply into the society. What we saw, what happened in Erfurt, because they were, and they are still nowadays, very well connected in the city of Erfurt. They have the restaurants where the mayor goes, where the state governor of Thuringia went to have lunch. So they are very well connected, and they know, okay, if we kill someone, if we do crimes like this on the street, then police will look at us, and if we don't, they don't. But nonetheless, and this is like the newest operations, probably we'll be talking about Operation Eureka that happened in May this year. It showed they have the weapons, and nonetheless they use the massacre of San Luca, for example. They use it to show their power to others, and say, okay, we are the ones connected to San Luca, so we are to take seriously. Yeah, so even if they don't do it, they are still quite dangerous.
Yes, it's really interesting. Some groups use less violence, but that doesn't mean that they are less entrenched in a certain system. And exactly because as a result of not using violence, they don't get prioritized by the police very often, which rightly so as well, is focusing on immediate threats to, for example, the life of other people, but that basically allows certain structures to grow over time. So when you're speaking about the structures in Erfurt, but not just those, also the structures of the Ndrangheta more generally in Germany, they, Margherita, you said it traced back to the 60s and 70s, and most of these clans, they have been operative all this time without interruption. And sometimes the police looked at them. So we do have operations that kind of uncover parts of the business. But then again, there's nothing for many years, and these structures just remain on the territory. And this is what makes it so difficult also to collect information for us, because the attention of the police is always on and off. And we work very much with obviously what the police is doing in terms of investigative work. So maybe, yeah, going back to this aspect of the talk today, which is how do we find this information? Me as a researcher for my publications, you for your documentary, for your investigative pieces that are published in the newspaper. Margherita, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about how you go about finding sources. What are these sources? Where do you find them?
Well, we really take like a wide approach when we started working on our investigation, because we were looking at something, a phenomenon that took place 30 years ago, because we concentrated on how and when the Ndrangheta arrived in Eastern Germany. So of course, it was something back in time, and we really had like to take a wide approach, because we couldn't like just rely on first-hand documents at the very beginning. So we, for example, of course, we have police sources. We have sources like, I would say not even only police, but we have like sources amongst investigators, as we are investigative journalists. And as you were saying, since we cannot infiltrate the Ndrangheta ourselves, and it's very difficult to find someone from the Ndrangheta willing to talk to you. I mean, there are, of course, how do you call them? Whistleblower, how do you call it? Kronzeugen.
State witnesses.
State witness, thank you.
Yeah.
You have, of course, state witnesses, but in this case, in the case of the San Luca Ndrangheta in East Germany, there were, when we were working into it, almost no one who could say something about it. So we were talking, of course, to our sources, but we did also a lot of archive work. Like we went, for example, into the newspaper archive, into the press archive, and like looked for all articles that had been published about Italian restaurants in Thuringia and in Saxony back then. We then had a look, of course, at also old court cases. We made also, do you call it FOIA, so freedom of information requests, also here in Germany, to get access to all documents. We talked to a lot of people who knew, like, for example, let's say in Erfurt, it's not that big city. It's a city, but still not that big. So we were also able to talk to people who could remember, like when the first Calabrian guys arrived there in Thuringia, and we could talk to them about them. And of course, we did a lot of field work in both Italy and Germany. Like I traveled several times to Italy. We traveled several times to Italy during the 2 years we had been working on the investigation. We also traveled a lot to Nordrhein-Westfalen, which is like the place where some of the guys that came to Thuringia were living before coming there. So we made a lot of field work. But I have to say it wasn't easy. As said, our goal at the beginning was to find out a little bit more about this widely unknown investigation, and we only had a name that took place at the beginning of the 2000 against Ndrangheta in Thuringia and Saxony, and we had just a name and a case number and a new case investigation number, and we were hoping to get a little bit more about it. What we couldn't imagine was that we would end up having like thousands of pages connected to the investigation, and that we could have access to like hundreds.
This is investigation FIDO, Operation FIDO,
exactly.
Right?
This is Operation FIDO, which is like at the center of our investigation, because it just gave us the possibility through hundreds of wiretap conversations to really take a closer look at how these alleged Ndrangheta members operated and how their business activity were built up. So it was very, very interesting. So it ended up being the focus of our work.
And this operation, though, never really went through court, right?
Exactly.
It was stopped at some point. David, can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, it was a really big operation trying to look into the structures So they started like from zero. They like had some names coming from, because many of the alleged Ndrangheta members in Erfurt had been in Duisburg and other cities of Germany before they went to Eastern Germany, and then they started to investigate and did a lot, like as Margherita said, a lot of wiretap conversations. They were looking at the restaurants. They were, what we then found out, they even managed to infiltrate at least one, probably more, undercover agents like around the group. Unfortunately, we couldn't find out the exact details, because an undercover operation is always very dangerous, and like it was really hard even to, like, it took years. Axel and Ludwig have been investigating the case for really years now, more than 10 years now, and then it was really hard to get the sources to give us information. But then we found out, okay, they had this undercover source quite closely around this Ndrangheta group, and this is something very special, because usually never happens, because they usually don't trust anyone but their own family. So it was a really good, well-planned operation, in my opinion. And it was like the police from the state of Thuringia. It was the German federal police working together, and of course together with the Italian colleagues. And yeah, they were working for more or less 2 years, and like we had access to documents of meetings, or like the protocols of the meetings. And there we found out, like, the main investigators were talking about, okay, probably we'll need 5 years to find, to get something to be able to bring them before court, because they, like, what they heard, for example, in the wiretaps, like, it proved their suspicion, and the suspicion was, okay, the money that is invested in all these restaurants in Erfurt and around Erfurt comes from the Ndrangheta, is probably drug money that is being laundered in this way. And there were a lot of hints, like, proving this. They were talking about, you see, we heard it before in the start of the film. They say, okay, we are investors, we are not just restaurant owners. And then you can see, but when they talk, you can hear it's a system. It's not like one restaurant and then the brother or the cousin opens another one, but it's a system. They all are together. It's like one big working, like one big company. Even then, when later on they invested in Portugal as well, like coming from Erfurt. So they had a lot of hints, and it looked like it was proven, but it's really hard. And at this time, legislation in Germany was even harder for investigators than it's nowadays. Because, like, to prove that it's actually money laundering, you have to prove, or at this time it's a bit easier today, but still very, very difficult concerning money laundering here in Germany. They have to prove that, like, if you buy a restaurant for 500,000 euros, then you have to prove that exactly this money comes from another crime, and you have to prove what's the crime.
Exact crime, exactly.
Yeah.
But the crime might be, okay, it's a cocaine shipment going from Ecuador going to Gioia Tauro in Italy. So it's nearly impossible
It's very difficult to prove that, because, as I understand it, you really have to prove which drug deal is financing exactly which amount of money that is being invested in the pizzeria, and that exact link cannot be general. It has to be an exact link. So Margherita, can you tell us a little bit more? David spoke about it, the system. There is a system behind it. Can you explain what it means? Also, because we've been speaking now about effort, but investment of this group of people is not just limited to the area of effort. So you found out, all of you together as a team, that the network of investment is much broader than just one city in Germany.
It is indeed, yeah. I also prepared some of the wiretap conversation, and I'm going to read to you some of them, because I think that explains it a little bit more, like in a concrete way. Because when we first read the wiretap conversation of these alleged Ndrangheta members, we were really surprised to see how they were really bubbling with ideas, how busy they were, like looking for new places to invest money into. Like some of them were literally flying through the world to Barcelona, for example, to see if they could buy a pizzeria for, I think, 2 million German mark, or to Prague, or even to the US. So they were really like jet setting through the world, looking for places to open. And they weren't just, like, as David was already saying, they weren't just blindly investing in some random places. It's of course difficult to state that for sure, like we cannot know for sure, but reading the wiretap conversation, we had the impression that they were really following a plan, as David was saying. For example, in one wiretap conversation, one of the core figures of the group said to a business partner, "We keep what we have in Erfurt. Leipzig has future because it's still a virgin city. The Leipzig project is a long-lasting one." For the one amongst you who doesn't know it, Leipzig is one of the most populous cities in the state of Saxony, and it's also one of the cities where the alleged Ndrangheta members started opening restaurants after they already opened several in Erfurt. And as you see, they talk about Leipzig being a virgin city, meaning probably we can just only alleged it being virgin because still not being touched by the Ndrangheta, or still not having this like big Italian restaurant networks that they were planning to open there. So as you see, it sounded like the group was following a strategy. As the same guy put it in another occasion, David already told it like they were talking about them about investors. And in one wiretap conversation, the same guy says, "If we wanted to be simple restaurateur, we would have opened a small restaurant with 10 tables, but we are investors." So you see, they were willing to invest money to build up a flourishing business. Then there are like some other wiretap conversation, like getting back to a person close to the group, talking to the same guy. And they talk about secret operations and even about money hidden somewhere under the ground. And then there is one last interesting thing, is that this guy that were coming from Calabria, like these alleged Ndrangheta members, they were apparently relying on two guys, non-Calabrian, for this business operation. In a wiretap conversation, the same guy I was talking now the whole time, not all the whole time, but in the most cases, he said to another business partner, he clearly mentioned that they are using he call it the malicious system, and malicious is the nickname he was using for these other non-Calabrian guys. It's like they needed someone to with financial skills to help them. And you were already saying, Zora, that this network was not active only in Thuringia, but also in some other places. And indeed, I was saying already, they were bubbling with ideas and looking for places to open money. And during our investigation, we tried to trace how many companies were connected to those guys back then, so back after the fall of the Berlin Wall in the 90s until today. And we really find hundreds of companies, and not only in Germany, but also in Italy and in Portugal, for example, and even in Spain. So we could really find over 100 companies allegedly connected to them. We could either find, in some cases, like the direct connection, and in other cases, through other guys who were circling around them too.
Yes, that's incredibly interesting, trying to really map out how far this network goes, and the difficulty of them bringing it all together with hardcore evidence, because that evidence is always scattered across different places. So you really have to puzzle it together. Now, David, I know that you would like to also show some more maybe of your documentary. You tell me when it's a good moment, or you want to...
Yeah,
I think you can do it now.
You can do it now. I think that it's another part that shows also how well entrenched they were in Duisburg, in Erfurt. I think if you start there, more or less, some seconds further, but this, yeah, exactly.
2 years previously crop up again. According to those files, it was important for the Locridi clans to keep all their businesses in the family to reduce the danger of being betrayed. None of the suspects from back then is willing to comment today. In fact, one of them tried to get a lawyer to block our report. The old files show that the cooperation between Italy and Germany was quite extensive. The Carabinieri even sent an investigator to Erfurt to scout out the restaurants. But their businesses were booming, and it was difficult to prove that they were financed with drug money. The police apparently had an undercover agent in the group. The operation had a promising beginning, but was hampered by a fear of betrayal, and for good reason. Erfurt's Italians clearly had the best contacts in politics and the judiciary.
There's a judge here in the restaurant with his wife. He's waiting for you.
The judge has just arrived. Tell him to wait 5 minutes. I've got to give him something.
He's here.
I know, I'm coming. I'll bring the thing for the judge.
In addition, local Erfurt VIPs were regularly invited to the Calabrian homeland, to weddings, for instance. The guests were put up in hotels and given VIP treatment in fancy bars. The same went for the participants in a business trip. Investigators say a Christian Democrat city councilor from Erfurt, an investigating magistrate, and the manager of a Sparkasse bank all attended the trip. But allegedly, the files no longer exist.
Yeah. So I think that's
You can cut it.
fine. You can cut
Then,
it
to the
here.
That's
Perfect. Thank you.
incredibly interesting. So just the last few seconds, right, where you were listing all of the people that had been in contact with this network and had been invited to Calabria to take part of what are events that we might look at as not being relevant. You know, a wedding is not that relevant, but in fact, what we know about these organizations is that exactly these events and happenings, which have a symbolic value almost, of meaning you're part of the family, that's why you get invited to a wedding, are really, really relevant. So what did we have? We have a magistrate, we have Sparkasse, that's a bank, representative. So we have politicians. So we have basically almost the whole legal world is represented, from business to politics to the judiciary as well. And we're speaking here about Germany, not about Calabria. So can you also tell us, like, what does it mean? Does that mean corruption? Or how should we think about this? I don't know, David or Margherita, you decide who wants to take this question.
I could say something about.
Go for it, David.
Like corruption in the straight way. We didn't find corruption in the straight way, like someone paying someone for a favor. Mm-hmm. Even the phone call we listened to about the judge, because they were friends to a judge who wasn't like directly involved, but and even politicians were going there for the restaurant. There was like one time the police stormed one of the restaurants. They went in there, and then there was the governor and the minister of interior of the state of Thuringia were sitting there and discussing their politics. So this shows like they are very well connected. I wouldn't say this corruption. Like, what we found out is more people were looking very naive at this. Like I just got a sip to drink or a coffee, and I always paid my food. And like, it was like they didn't realize that how important for a mafia group or alleged mafia group is to be entrenched like this. And you can see, as you said, they exactly knew who they needed. For example, the banks. I even talked to a banker who went to the restaurant regularly, and he told me, yeah, they were very nice and everything. And then of course it's much easier for them to get a credit and to buy a new restaurant, and then like every month they pay a few €1,000. Probably they pay in cash at the bank, and in the end they have a restaurant, and there's no way to prove where the money came from.
Yeah.
So, and even with the politicians, of course, like we couldn't prove, and I think there is no proof that there was actual corruption. But of course, for the police, it's much harder to go into a restaurant, to search a restaurant, to continue the investigation if it's a restaurant where the state governor goes.
Yes.
And it's much easier to search a shisha bar or something like this. It's much easier to continue to do the police work. So they built this network around them that protected them and protects them actually until today.
And this is a relevant point. Margherita, did you want to add something to this?
I just wanted to add one thing. There is just one thing we could really see black and white, and it was the fact that investigators decided not to go, or they couldn't go too deep into financial investigation back then, because they were afraid of this connection to the banks. So they were saying, like, I cannot remember, correct me if I'm wrong, David, I'm not sure if they were talking about connection to the banks or in the financial world, but this was like this statement telling about that investigators cannot take a too closer look into the financial part of it, because of this connection to the financial world that the alleged Ndrangheta members have, which you see, it's like a big wall in the middle of the investigation if you cannot look that close at the finance. So just to say, we couldn't find and prove, as David said, any hint of actual corruption, but like the situation of entrenchment, like really was a problem for investigators back then.
And very often we think that we always need what you said, Margherita, actual corruption, like the amount of money that is given maybe physically in exchange for a favor, and that's how the mafia operates systematically. But in fact, in Italy, it's exactly the same way. Often these kind of networks are built up in favors that are not quantified or being able to be touched or they don't look like money that is being exchanged. It's more of a favor and another favor that will come at a later point in time. And in fact, one of the earliest studies of the Sicilian mafia already was showing, and I cite here an author, Diego Gambetta. He was saying actually the mafia would amount to very little if there wasn't a whole system around, a whole network around it that, as you said, David, is protecting it. And that protection might be conscious to a certain extent, but might also be unconscious. So this naivete is protecting exactly in the same way, actually, as a conscious protection of the network. So you don't need to be aware necessarily or to have bad intentions. You might also just be naive and you're still protecting a network which is a criminal network ultimately, and you're helping that network to entrench in society, and by being entrenched, making the work of policemen, for example, really, really difficult. So Fido never saw light, really. It was stopped. Why was it stopped? Do we know anything about this?
Long story. What struck us, like David already said it, what struck us when we started looking into the Fido documents, so we already, or our colleague Axel and Ludwig already knew from their sources that the investigation was closed without coming to how do you say it, without coming to court. It was closed after two years. And what struck us was that the operational measures connected to the investigation, meaning the wiretap conversation and the observation and all other things police were doing, were closed when the operation really started getting promising, which means back then what we could reconstruct was that David already quoted, that there were at least 2 undercover agents that infiltrated these alleged Ndrangheta groups, and these 2 received an invitation to a marriage in San Luca, and this was the point when, short after it, the operation, they couldn't go there, the 2 undercover agent, and that's the point when then the investigation was closed a couple of months later. And as David already quoted, the interesting thing was that we could gain access to a protocol where we could read that there was a meeting between the prosecutor, the German prosecutor that was dealing with the case, and the police, and he was telling them to motivate them, we are going to work for the next 5 years these, and we need to invest a lot of energy into it, etc. And then suddenly, some months after, the investigation was closed. And it's a bit hard to explain because it's very technical, but probably it all came to sort of let's say, how can we put it? Different point of views between the major prosecutor, the state prosecutor, and the prosecutor who was looking into the case, right? I don't know if David want to go more into details, or we should just leave it like that. But at the end, it was a sort of different point of views about this whole situation. But we have to say that at the end, there is even a parliamentary commission of inquiry who have been built after our documentary in Thuringia, looking exactly into this, like looking exactly into why was this operation closed at this early stage. And they are still looking into it, and we still don't know the very exact reason, but it's becoming more and more clear. And actually, almost everything we told in our documentary was then confirmed by this committee of inquiry until now.
And this inquiry is still going on. Maybe it's worth mentioning that Operation Fido, we are in the year 2000. So this is now 20 years ago. And we are talking about this 20 years later. Why are we talking about this? Is there a relevance also for today? We've seen, David, you spoke about it, I think you referred to it. There is a new operation now that kind of links back to the same structures that were part of this operation 20 years ago. This new operation is called Operation Eureka, and just took place a few months ago, this year, in fact. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this operation? Why is it relevant today, and how does it trace back to Erfurt and to Operation Fido?
Sure. Eureka was in May this year. It was like Europol called it like the biggest international operation against the Ndrangheta, because it had been going on since 2019. I think it started in Belgium, then Italy was involved, then Germany, and then a lot of other countries as well. They arrested more than 100 alleged members of the Ndrangheta, or at least connected to Ndrangheta, and especially the clans from San Luca that are some of the most influential, most important clans. And yeah, also some of the alleged members from Operation Fido were arrested, 3 of them. And that was very interesting for us to see, because it finally, also thanks to new possibilities of investigation, for example, the crypto phones they were using and the police could access, like EncroChat, SkyCC, it finally was possible to, according to the investigators, there have been no court cases yet, to prove that the system, or that the Erfurt is connected to all this international network coming from San Luca, going to Erfurt, to Portugal, but also with cocaine shipments from Latin America going all the way to Australia. So it shows they are still there. The structure is still working, and it's not just a little outpost there in Eastern Germany, but it's like a very important place, a very important point of the network for all their, especially the money laundering, of course.
Yeah, so Eureka is really about drug trafficking and money laundering. So it brings these two aspects together, which were the aspects that we said it's so difficult to link, in fact. And so, through like encrypted messages, we could basically shed light on the network that we kind of knew was there already. We didn't know how extensive it was, though, right? We could think about it. We could have theories, but we were not sure about how extended this network is. And so we're speaking about tons of cocaine that come in from Latin America. What was it? From Panama, Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador as well. Exactly. Australia as well, on the other hand, right?
It was going to Australia. It was shipped to Australia in the end. Yeah, exactly.
And Erfurt in the middle of it.
Exactly. Erfurt being connected to all these other places worldwide, indeed, which was like what we already suspected, what we already had hints. Like, for example, we had a lot of information already about the network connected, like the connection between Erfurt and Portugal. So this was like a confirmation of what we already could see through our own researches. And then we had like this like global dimension, which we already knew the Ndrangheta had, because it was not unknown to us that this Ndrangheta was importing cocaine from South America. But we could like see its connection, like, for example, exactly the shipment going to Australia. And it was really interesting for us, like to see how things evolved from back then.
Can you tell me a bit more, David, maybe about the Portugal connection? Why is Portugal important to the group in Germany?
This also started back then when 20 years ago or even more than 20 years ago during Operation Fido. There we already saw that some of the alleged members from Erfurt invested in Portugal and went there. And we the same investigation, same field work we did in Germany, we did in Portugal. And we found, I don't remember exactly, about 40 companies connected to the network, more or less 10 restaurants in Lisbon, in the middle of the tourist hotspots, and in Coimbra, in Braga, and other places. So we saw they were doing the same system that they had started in Erfurt. They were doing Portugal now, and even one of the most of the capos, local, who was alleged to be one of the local bosses in Erfurt, one of them went to Portugal and managed all this. And then in the year, I don't know which year, but Italian prosecutors, they found a scratchbook of the wife of this alleged capo or former capo in Erfurt. And it showed there were the names of restaurants and a lot of sums of money flowing. It's hard to it's not easy. It's not okay, here money going from here to there, but it's possible to read it that way, that all these restaurants are connected, as I said before. They are part of a network, and it's not being it's just family, and then there's one cousin opening a restaurant in Portugal and he's doing his thing there, but there's money flowing. They all are connected to a system. So and perhaps to explain a bit how it worked, it's also worth to talk about some restaurants in Rome, in Italy, they bought and opened, because this is quite interesting. They bought also very, very good, expensive restaurants in the middle of Rome for more than 1 million euro. Yeah. And then there was a case made in Italy, because in Italy it's much easier than, for example, in Germany to seize money or to seize houses or restaurants if they are connected to somehow connected to the mafia, and if you cannot prove where the money is coming from. So there was a case opened, and the prosecutors tried to seize these restaurants in Rome. And one argument, and in the end the alleged mafia members won. One argument was, okay, of course we can buy these restaurants. We have so many restaurants in Germany. It's easy for us to have 1 million to buy a restaurant here, or probably they paid even more. But this shows exactly how important Germany and how important this is in all their money laundering scheme, to have a place like Erfurt.
Mm-hmm. If I can add something on that, this is most likely also going to be one of the problem there is going to be also with Operation Eureka, because this operation concentrates, as David already said, also on Portugal and on the alleged money that were laundered there into the gastronomy. But this money, it's more likely that the argument is going to be this money comes from the very successful activities we had in Germany. I can imagine, I cannot know for sure, of course, but this is if you have had in the past a very flourishing business somewhere in the world, like in this case in Germany, it's very hard to prove that this money back then came from money laundering and then you just invested it. So it's actually very difficult. It's something which should have happened back then in Germany when Operation Fido was ongoing and then stopped. This was the time where this thing could have been proven, if this ever happened, of course. But
you're totally right. And I think this is also sometimes something that gets forgotten, that we are not speaking just about money laundering. We are speaking about investments in the legal economy. And the first step might be money laundering, and investments might come from drug money, for example, or from money generally from illegal activity. But that is at time one, whenever that time is. And then over time, actually, these businesses, they are 1, 2, or 3 steps away from the illegal source, and they become, in a sense, legal. And then it's going to be very difficult to go backwards and prove where it originally came from. One can even argue, maybe at this point it's not illegal anymore. So we shouldn't be doing anything about it, really. Only that when then operations such as Eureka happen, we discover that in fact the people involved in it are involved in drugs, for example, or are part of a criminal organization, which is a criminal organization. So we cannot argue that these businesses are completely clean, because they still trace back to a criminal organization whose main activity is of criminal nature. I'm aware of the time. For us, at least, it's very early in the morning. So I would maybe ask each of you if you want to add anything, if there's any points that we've forgotten in this discussion that you think are relevant and we should discuss, and then I would wrap this up. And thank you, obviously, for this really interesting discussion. So who wants to go first with a few final comments?
I think we almost said everything I think was important to say. I don't know, I'm looking to David. If he has something to add, maybe then some ideas might pop up to my mind too.
Well, maybe I don't know, I might add something about Operation Eureka. What for me is so particular about this operation is that for me it shows why the Ndrangheta is so successful globally. Because you see, it's so striking. You see, because if once you are like we've been investigating this for so many years now, then you see you know the connections, and then you see, okay, we have one of the restaurant owners in Erfurt is arrested, then his cousin is living in Australia, then you have another cousin, or I don't know, they're connected in Munich, who are directly connected to drug trafficking in South America, and then they have someone living there. So you have this core family doing business all around the world on the one hand, and they keep it very close, but on the other hand, they work together like with everyone in the criminal underworld. Like they work together with Chinese money launderers, they work in Brazil, they work together with the PCC selling the drugs to the cocaine to them, work in Colombia. There are chats, they talk about buying weapons in Pakistan, selling them to Brazilian gangs. So it's really crazy how connected this criminal world is.
Yeah, it's basically the global aspect to it, but then at the same time, interesting how local this is. Yeah. So that's how we started, and I think it's a good way to wrap it all up. We started asking the question: why are we even talking about Ndrangheta in East Germany? Why are we having a panel session about such a small place, because it is a small place, East Germany or Thuringia or Erfurt, even more a city just, and just a few members organized sitting there and investing in the legal economy. Why would we care? Why is this relevant? And I hope for whoever is going to see this recording as well, that what really came out of the discussion is that it is relevant. In fact, it is connected to more than just Germany, to more than just Europe even. And the only way to try to understand what is going on, though, is not to start from looking at the global to begin with, but to go really on the ground, in the field, and starting to step by step put together the information to then build up. Build up the whole network. We have a question in the Q&A, I'm informed. So let's take this question before wrapping up. Carlos Morales asks, even though they are known for working in the shadows and never truly putting themselves in the spotlight, which crime operations are the most dangerous one you think they control or they participate in? So crime operations, I might not be 100% sure whether they mean criminal activities, possibly. What is the most dangerous element and dimension of the Ndrangheta?
Like, I would say every criminal activity is dangerous indeed. Of course, like drug trafficking is, for me, like drug trafficking, cocaine trafficking mostly is like the most criminal activity controlled by the Ndrangheta, and I think this is a very dangerous one, just because of the fact that it gives the Ndrangheta like an incredible amount of money, out of which, all right, sorry, I was just distracted by the recording project. So I think like the cocaine trafficking, which is the main source of income of the Ndrangheta, is also one of the most like dangerous criminal activity for the legal world, just because of the fact actually that they get such an immense amount of money out of it, which then allows them to infiltrate legal economy and the legal world. So I would probably look in that way, even if every criminal activity they are involved to, it's of course dangerous.
David, do you agree with that?
Sure. And yes, it's again, Operation Eureka shows, for example, there were a lot of pictures they were sending around on encrypted phones, pictures of weapons. So they are, even though they don't appear, even though they don't walk around the streets with their weapons, they have them, and if they need, they use them. So yeah, it's everything connected to them and to drug trafficking, as Margherita said, is dangerous.
Yeah, so not to forget that it might look just very nice and welcoming to walk into a pizzeria, that we cannot connect it back to an organization that is in fact buying arms, storing arms, and letting tons of cocaine flow into Europe. So being the connecting node in this network, which again brings us back to why it is really important to put this network together. Maybe do you have another question? In fact, yes, by Judith, and she asks whether you could comment on the collaboration of Ndrangheta with German entrepreneurs in Thuringia, the so-called zona grigia, so the gray zone between. So how does it work? Do entrepreneurs collaborate with Ndrangheta? Do they do so consciously, unconsciously?
I think we answered it a lot while David was talking about the how do you say, the people that, when we were talking about the people that allegedly went to these how do you say, marriage in San Luca back at the time of Operation Fido. And as we were saying before, it's like difficult to prove if this was like, as we said, it was just more like being in touch with them. So, right. So it's not like for what we could see, we don't have any proof that any of the alleged Ndrangheta members even ever corrupted actually some of these people from the legal world. But we can say for sure that they were in contact with lots of them. And this is like, it's not like corruption as you could imagine it, like buying these people, but it's building up a network that, as David said, could always be useful for several operations, like, for example, for investing money or for getting like the permission to, I don't know, build up something more. And it's in a city as Erfurt, for example, which, as I said before, is not a big city, but like a smaller reality. Even if it's not that small, it's not like a village, but and it's very important to have this connection, because these are the one that like opens you lots of doors. But as said, we couldn't prove any actual corruption there.
David, do you want to add anything to this?
No, I think Margherita said everything.
Okay, perfect. Then thank you very much for the questions. I'm very happy that we had some interaction because in my time zone this is 6:30 in the morning, and I hope you are in a different time zone. You that asked the questions, but if not, thank you very much for participating in this panel. Thank you, even if you are in a different time zone, that you've participated here. Watch the documentary. That would be my final point. It is one of the best done documentaries on the Ndrangheta. We've watched a few scenes together, but there's so much more in the documentary that we couldn't maybe talk about. That is just more detailed information that makes this documentary just really worth watching. Thank you, Margherita. Thank you, David, for this discussion. And I would leave it here and say goodbye to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I also posted the link to our documentary in the chat just for everyone to click on it if they want to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Zora, for the
Thank you, Zora.
great moderation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.